On behalf of Johnson Publishing Company, the University of Chicago Urban Education Institute, and MSNBC, welcome to the Ebony Education Roundtable discussion.
Too much pride to back off of it. I wear it well when no one can see.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the president of the University of Chicago, Robert J. Zimmer.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Welcome to the Ebony Education Roundtable, a collaboration between the University of Chicago and Ebony Magazine. We're here today to discuss the education of our youth, an issue that is central to our society's future. I'm pleased that we can be here together to explore this important matter, and I'm likewise pleased that Ebony Magazine and Johnson Publishing Company have been our partner in hosting this event. A commitment to diversity has always been central to the University of Chicago's mission of teaching and research, and central as well to our community engagement. Throughout its history, the university has worked to foster an open and diverse scholarly environment. Minorities have been welcomed on this campus since the university's inception, and the first doctorate earned by an African-American woman in the United States was awarded here at the university in 1921. In an earlier era of many quotas and discrimination against many groups in this country, we welcome students and faculty from all populations, not only from this country, but from around the world. The founders of the University of Chicago recognized that diversity is essential to truly open discourse, something we continue to recognize and act on today. By confronting ideas and opinions divergent from our own, presented by people whose backgrounds and lives may be different from our own, we reassess many fundamental assumptions that we may have. We thereby gain a richer understanding of ourselves and of our world. The University of Chicago was forged with these understandings and ideals, and in a geographic location of such diversity, not just Hyde Park, but the entire city of Chicago, we find ourselves constantly benefiting from the richness of our environment. Our business relations, too, are better because of these diverse perspectives and experiences. The University of Chicago is not only an education and research institution. It's a place where many people work and a place where many business relationships are formed for us in the city and beyond. We found that both the university and the surrounding community are made stronger by the exchange of ideas and resources, by working with women and minority-owned businesses, by seeking a diverse population of employees, faculties, and students, and by seeking to gain insight on issues that face the university and also those that face our neighbors and friends. Diversity is not a process with an endpoint, but rather an ongoing commitment, and it's imperative that embracing diversity is a key factor in all of the university's relationships. Events like today's are prime examples of the potential and value of such interactions. The University of Chicago is also focused on ways in which the scholarship and research that occurs within the university can contribute to our society as a whole. The university's Urban Education Institute has demonstrated dramatic, tangible success in this regard. UEI was established to improve the trajectory of children's lives by exploring and seeking best practices in all aspects of pre-K through 12 education. It is both data-driven and focused on responding in the classroom to what we learn. Research on policy and education methods is conducted through UEI's Consortium on Chicago School Research, now in its 20th year. The Urban Teacher Education Project offers preparation and support to new teachers entering specifically urban schools. UEI also operates the 4 campuses of the University of Chicago Charter School, which graduated its first class of 51 high school seniors this past June. And I'm particularly pleased that 98% of this year's graduates were accepted to four-year colleges and universities around the country, earning a combined $1.5 million in scholarship awards. Three of the students from our first graduating class are actually with us today at this event. Currently, there are over 1,600 children from the Chicago area that are enrolled in our charter school campuses. The students are selected by lottery, and their academic talents are developed by the support of the school's ambitious curricula, trained advisors, and University of Chicago faculty. Here at the University of Chicago, we have the opportunity to use our resources and our scholarship to address the challenges facing our society, not with a predetermined set of conclusions, but with the same desire for understanding, analysis, innovation, and advancement that the university has in everything that it does. It is also important that we find partners who share our belief in the importance and value of a thoughtful and informed public. Today, I now have the pleasure to present to you a friend of mine, a leader in the publishing world and in the African American business community, Linda Johnson Rice. But before I turn to Linda, however, I would like to extend my congratulations to Desiree Rogers, who, it was announced yesterday, will succeed Linda as CEO of Johnson Publishing Company. Congratulations. Linda Johnson Rice is a Chicago native, and since she was a child, has been a part of Johnson Publishing Company, which her father founded in 1942. As the chairman of Johnson Publishing Company, which publishes Ebony and Jet magazines, Linda's innovation, hard work, and commitment have made a significant impact on leaders across the nation and, in fact, around the world. During her time at Johnson Publishing Company, she's worked variously as fashion coordinator, vice president, special assistant to the publisher, president and chief operating officer, and from 2002 until yesterday has been CEO and chairman, and she will continue as chairman going forward. She is today the leader of an iconic publication and one of the largest minority-owned companies in the nation. She leads more than 2,000 employees, and Johnson Publishing Company's publications reach over 20 million readers in 40 countries. Since assuming her role as chief executive, Linda has overseen steady growth domestically and abroad in a very challenging economic environment and a challenging environment for the publishing industry as a whole. Ebony and Jet magazines have long been cultural touchstones for their readers. To her great credit, Linda has used her place at the helm of Johnson Publishing Company to effect change in the lives of her readers and in the communities in which they live. She is involved in a number of organizations, including the Boys and Girls Clubs of Chicago, the Magazine Publishers of America, and Chicago's Museum of Contemporary Art, among others. She's also a member of the National Association of Black Journalists. She's received numerous accolades during her career, and she is notably a winner of both the National Urban League's Women of Power Award and the Turner Broadcasting's Trumpet Award. Today's event is a testament to her continued engagement in improving the lives of people everywhere and her unrelenting desire to critically examine the most difficult issues facing our society. Please join me in welcoming Linda Johnson Rice.
Thank you, President Zimmer. I almost didn't recognize myself there. That was pretty good. Good evening, everyone. I am delighted that Ebony has embarked upon such a very, very unique partnership with MSNBC and the University of Chicago. This partnership will allow Ebony readers, Chicago, and hopefully hundreds of thousands of viewers nationally to participate in this important discussion about education with such a very esteemed group of panelists. You know, for more than 6 decades, Ebony has been bringing to the forefront headlines and issues that affect the African American community. We take pride in our work and with the Roundtable, and that the Roundtable has allowed Ebony to take our stories from the magazine and further engage our readers on very, very important issues. We want to provide a platform for our readers and our community to be actively involved in addressing vital societal issues like education. We appreciate the many teachers, parents, students, community leaders, state and local government officials who've joined us tonight, and more importantly, have given their time and efforts to champion the cause to help establish a much brighter future for our youth. At this time, I would like to introduce you to Ebony's editor-in-chief, Amy Dubose Barnett. She has only been on board with us for 2 months, but in those 2 months, she's already made her way to the White House to interview President Obama for our September issue regarding his $4.35 billion Race to the Top education initiative and other very pressing topics related to the success of our children. She's a talented author and a brand architect who brings a wealth of experience to her very new post. I'm delighted to have her take Ebony to the very next level. Please welcome Amy Dubose Barnett. Amy?
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Tamron Hall. Tamron Hall anchors MSNBC Live weekday mornings and afternoons. She's also an NBC News correspondent and newsreader for The Today Show and Weekend Today. Prior to joining MSNBC, Hall spent 10 years at WFLD in Chicago, where she held a number of positions, including host of the 3-hour Fox News in the Morning program. Hall received a Bachelor of Arts in Broadcast Journalism from Temple University. She's a member of the National Association of Black Journalists. And she's also very involved in charitable organizations that help women fight abuse and in organizations that work to end illiteracy. Please join me in welcoming Tamron Hall.
Hi, everyone. Whoop, I dropped my pen. I'm already messing up. Okay. I'm so honored to be here today. This is my first time back in Chicago, and believe it or not, about a year and a half, and I've missed Harold's Chicken. I've missed Lakeshore Drive. I've missed the beautiful views, the beautiful people, and the amazing families and friends that I've made over the 10 years. So to come back a year and a half later to talk about something that is so important to all of us, I was overwhelmed, to be quite honest with you, when I found out we were going to be doing this. So I want to say a special thank you to Desiree, Linda, thank you. This is my adopted home, but it's really my family. And we're talking about something that affects all of our families. And thank you to Amy and the entire staff at Ebony. They've been amazing in putting this together. I want to start off by introducing our panel, because I think that Ebony has done an amazing job, and you can see amazing is my favorite word, an amazing job at putting together a diverse panel that I think will answer many of the questions that you have today, and perhaps even questions when you get home and you think, I was wondering about that will linger in your mind far after this conversation. So let me start off by introducing our panel. Shane Evans, Director, University of Chicago. Thank you, Shane. Dr. Julianne Malveaux, President, Benedict College. Thank you, Dr. Malveaux. Elaine Allensworth, Director of Research at Consortium. Thank you, Elaine. Tim King, Founder and President, Urban Prep Charter. Ruslan Ali, Assistant Secretary for the Office of Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education. And also, joining us later in our program, Mary Richardson Lowry, Chair of Chicago Board of Education. Thank you all. We have with us a number of questions that we put together, as well as questions that were given to us by viewers, by friends, and others who are concerned about the state of education. So we have them here. I'm going to mosey over there, and we'll start off our program. And thank you again for participating. I know it's hot. It feels like a Southern church, but that's okay. Hopefully we can have a come to Jesus moment on education. So our first question is directed to our entire panelists. And let me start off by saying, we know that education is an emotional issue. It is personal. So if any of you want to jump in at any time, I don't want to tap you to say, get in there. Please do, because we want candor, we want honest conversation, and we want real answers. The first question, President Obama has recently delivered speeches on the topic of education, one this week, as we know, calling it the economic issue of our time. Our students rank 25th among the top 30 developed nations in math, 21st in science. That means we're hovering over the bottom. Are we in an educational recession? Rosalind?
Yes, borderlining a depression. We are in a state of crisis in our country, not just based on the data that you mentioned, but for example, as the president has often said, we used to rank #1 in the percentage of college graduates. Now we are down to 12th globally. If we do not transform the way our schools work in this country, we will not sustain our ability to lead the world any longer. This is an economic crisis. When we look at the achievement gap data and see in almost every discipline, in almost every subject, African American students, Latino students, low-income students hover at the bottom. We also know it's a moral imperative. It's a demographic imperative as we look at the changing face of America. So indeed, it is an economic recession and crisis.
Dr. Malveaux, are we in a recession when it comes to education?
I think we're in a depression. I would agree with Ruslan in terms of looking at where we are. Piece of data that's interesting. If you look at people 55 to 64 years old, the United States ranks first in BA and AA degrees for 55 to 64-year-olds. Okay, if you look at 25 to 34-year-olds, same 40%, but we rank like 12th. So we have not improved our ability to deliver educational services over a 30-year period. Part of it really is demographic. The little kids in the suburbs are not struggling. It's inner city young black and brown kids who are struggling, and there are people who have written them off. And we see why they've written them off when we look at all the swirl around what's going on with these Tea Party people. You know, give them jobs, please, so they have something to do. Because obviously if they had something to do, they would not have to walk around talking all this doo-doo, all this nonsense. But yeah, hey, ADD, and a college president. But the point is that we really do have an issue that people have tried to parse and try to we have to have an initiative that looks at inner city schools, inner city, especially high schools. When young people come to Bennett College for Women, I can take anybody and turn them into a scholar. And let me just say, by the way, greetings from Bennett College for Women, the oasis where we educate and celebrate women and develop them into 21st century leaders and global thinkers. Let me also thank Linda and the Ebony team for having us here. I think this is really important. Got to get my elevator speech in, but also have to say, that it's just really critical that I think the White House has some great ideas, but the ideas have not. This race to the top could be a race to the bottom. I really want to see us look at these inner city schools and these young people who are brilliant, who are absolutely brilliant, and who are being stifled by the fact that we're not giving them what they need. And we will pay. In the long run, we will pay because China, India, Eastern Europe have more engineers than we do. Yes. I mean, China, India, I could get that because there are more of them. Eastern Europe, give me a break. I mean, Eastern Europe.
A little bit later, we're going to talk about some specifics regarding the jobs bill, the $26 billion, and what reform has started to happen in the administration, and we'll get Ruslan to answer that. But I want to direct this question to Elaine here. We know that it starts early, kindergarten. There's research that shows when you read to a child in the womb, that actually, so it really starts early. But let's talk about the early years grade school. What needs to be done to allow our children to start off right?
There's so much that needs to be done. And I actually want to address something that you said. I think the historical perspective is very important. If you consider the world has changed. We can think of ourselves as being in a recession, but the fact is, it's the rest of the world that's changed. I mean, we never, as a country, have graduated all of our students college ready, ever, right? I think right now we're at about 30% nationally. And the issue is then in our urban and our rural districts, where we have a lot of students who are living in poverty, we're far from meeting the aspirations of most of our children of coming out with a four-year college degree. In Chicago, out of 100 students that start high school, 60 of them actually get a high school diploma, and 6 end up getting a four-year college degree within 10 years of starting high school. So 6 out of 100 reach the aspirations that 85% of students have. Now, 85% of students did not always have those aspirations. Right. People today realize you need a college degree in this society. We haven't got there, but it means we need a complete transformation of our school system. If you think of changing that, of reaching that goal, it means a complete change, and it does mean starting way early in the early grades.
What do we need to start off right? Tim,
well,
you've had great success.
We have had a lot of success, and I was just going to add that those numbers are startling. I think it's also important to note that in Chicago, we've got about 90% of the students in public schools that they're Black and Latino. And so it is a significant, it's not just an issue that faces Chicago at one level, but it's a deeper issue as it relates to how we treat and educate or don't educate African American and Latino students. And at Urban Prep, all of our students are African American males. And if you look at those numbers, it's even more startling when you're talking about 2.5% finishing college, so 1 in 40. So it's really tough out there. It is an economic depression, as you said. It is a crisis for sure. In terms of solutions, what do? I think you've got to have strong commitment to excellence, and you've got to recognize that you've got an issue. If you aren't willing to say there's a particular issue when you have a school system where Black and Latino students make up the majority, yet they're dropping out at record numbers, they're not getting into college, they're not going to college, they're not succeeding in college, you've got to first admit there's a problem, and then you've got to start trying to...
That's why we're here. We've admitted, it's like the 5-step program, which I don't know all the steps, but I know one of them is you have to admit you have a problem. Everyone is here because we acknowledge and recognize there's a problem. So if there are no specifics to what we do to start off right, when are we then failing them? When are we seeing the drop-off point? I mean, you start off with the blocks and the colors, and you see kids knowing that. When do we lose them? Is it 6th grade? Is it 4th grade? When are these children being lost?
We lose them consistently, and I think that we lose them consistently because Dr. Melbo said something that was powerful. She said that all of our young people are brilliant, and that was a quick statement. But I don't think we paused enough to really reflect on that. The first question I would ask ourselves is that do we truly believe in the exceptional ability and the supreme intelligence of students of all hues, colors, and classes? We would say that we would believe that. We would say we would believe that, but Professor Lisa Delpit and other people's children would say that we have been bombarded with messages that tell us about the inferiority of Black and brown children for so long that it's hard for us to believe it. So first we start with belief. The second piece, I think we have to start with expectations. Yep.
Yes.
If people have high expectations for you, students meet them, period. Once we believe, we have to raise the expectations. But the third thing, and I think Tim was speaking to this, is why are we failing at such a high rate in the first place? Because we're doing school wrong. Young people love learning. Somehow schools have turned them off to it. Yes. And that's a problem. It's not a problem with the young people, it's a problem with the old people. And until we address the old people's problems, we're not going to address any of the young people's problems.
Okay, well, we're going to get to some of the specifics on how we can fix us old people. Myself, since I'm 40 next month in this. Never. Okay, but I want to direct this one to Ruslan. Communities across the country are now considering 4-day school weeks. And this is to save money. Other districts have shut down where there are now 33 plus kids in a classroom. Just this week here in Chicago, Ron Huberman, who was actually supposed to be a part of the panel, but unfortunately he had to cancel. He had to deliver a budget that included cuts for teachers' jobs, and it still left no reserve funds. Is this the bottom, or should all of these parents and concerned people out here brace for it to get worse?
It's hard to know if it's the bottom. What we know for sure, though, is that in this time of economic crisis, we have to make wiser decisions than we have in the past. Students need to be in school longer, not less.
Right.
Teachers need more time with them. Some of the solutions that we're seeing implemented across the country are things like focusing on the 2,000 dropout factories. Dr. Malveaux, you talk about an urban crisis. There are 2,000 schools in the country that produce nearly 75% of the African American and Latino dropouts in the country. If we focus our attention on those as we've done, this president and bipartisan Congress, we've devoted $4 billion to turning around those lowest performing schools. Money to be used for longer school day, for more support for teachers, early interventions for students so we catch them before we see them slip. But in this time, again, of economic crisis, while more money would be helpful to everyone, we have to spend what we have more wisely, according to what the research says makes a difference, according to what we're seeing at Urban Prep in figuring out a way to scale up those practices.
What is the most impressive thing you're seeing, at least from this administration? I know the $26 billion jobs bill, the House passed that, and that's a great thing. It saved jobs immediately. But what else is on the horizon that we can look forward to from the government? Because we know that the states and the cities are saying they can't do it alone.
Well, we're seeing, for example, just today, Chicago, Illinois got over $140 million to turn around the lowest performing schools. The jobs bill saves 5,600 jobs in Illinois. Faculty that would have otherwise been on the employment line. We're seeing great success from the Recovery Act, where $100 billion has gone into education. Over the next several months, we hope to reauthorize the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Title I, that has long been referred to as the lifeline for poor students in our schools.
Where does No Child Left Behind stand now?
No Child Left Behind is the iteration of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So when we reauthorize it, we will be reauthorizing No Child Left Behind. Currently, it is current law. Our proposals plan to fix what is broken about the law and keep what is good about it, not the least of which is, for the first time ever, we know that the achievement gap exists. We know where the problems lay, and as we're talking about today, it's now time to focus on the solutions.
Dr. Malveaux, I'm curious with your perspective, and I'll go off our notes a little bit or off the road, but I think it's a natural question. We have such an amazing and talented panel. People know the research, we know the numbers. The achievement gap, we know that these things exist. Every president, including this one, has promised to do something about education. It is a burden, but there is a natural desire, I think, from both sides of the aisle. They know the realities of the problems. Why haven't we fixed the education? I know that's a big question, but why is it still such a failure?
You know, my perspective is that the reason we haven't fixed it is because who we're educating. I mean, I think we've had a demographic shift in our country. If you look at us 20, 30 years ago, you saw more white kids, and I don't want to make it racial, but it is. It's just plainly racial. There are people who do not believe that black and brown kids need to go to college. We still have people who openly articulate that. When I went to undergrad school, I graduated with, $2,000 worth of loans. Now the average kid has $23,000 worth of loans. The average African-American kid, $28,000 worth of loans. The average HBCU grad, something a little more than that. We have decided that these kids are going to get it on their own, so Tim's work is so very important in making sure that they help them. But I think that if you poll that Senate, both sides of the aisle nonsense, we have not made educating young people a priority. If you use the historical perspective that you raised, let's just go back and look at the various times when compulsory education in our history was important. We go back to the late 18th, 19th century when, in fact, it was a law that you had to go to school until age 16. You look at the times when we put dollars into education, when Russia beat us to the moon. We decided we're going to throw money at math and science. But now you have this group of folks, young black and brown kids, who, again, you talk to some of these young people, stunning, amazing, but no opportunities. And so they go to Chicago public schools. I'm not going to pick on Chicago. I want to get out of here in one piece. But the fact is that Chicago kids go to school 25% less than Houston kids do. 25% less in terms of hours. So I've got 2 students who come to Bennett, one from Chicago, one from Houston. We've got to put a lot more remediation into the young person from Chicago because she has not had the opportunity to go to school. Why is that? I mean, how dare we say we're going to balance our budget on the back of young people who will be taking care of all of us when we're in old folks' home, you know? So you don't want somebody who you diss taking care of you when you're in old folks' home. It's just not going to turn out right. We have got to deal with the issue of how we look at these young black, and we've got to call it racially because it is racial.
Well, Dr. Melville, first you need your own talk show. So that we officially found Oprah's replacement in September. But Shane, I got to ask you, why do you believe that there are 2,000 dropout factor? I'd not heard that term until I watched Waiting for Superman, this documentary on what's happening. It's amazing. I left there crying, left there angry, but I was baffled that there are dropout factories. Like there was, you know, the GM plant somewhere that's churning out cars. They're churning out dropouts who, in many cases, end up being the criminal element who then drag down this neighborhood, and they're the people that end up making front page because they've killed someone, not because they've graduated from an amazing college. Why do we have dropout factories? How did that happen?
Well, I think first and foremost, one of the things that we do poorly is that we do a poor job designing schools to engage young people. Young people, again, I'm going to repeat this, they love to learn, but schools do a very good job of making them learn to memorize. So right now, there's a Nielsen study recently that showed that over the past 2 years, 18 to 24-year-olds doubled the amount of text messages they've sent, right? Doubled. But yet we banned cell phones from schools. But cell phones have dictionaries. Cell phones have web browsers. Cell phones have calculators. Cell phones have language translators. If we encourage the use of technology and speak the language of our children, then maybe they'd speak back to us, not only respectfully, but intelligently. We have to find ways to engage young people with the things that they do. I think about Shawnee Edmond, a graduate of the University of Chicago. She's a designer. She's a filmmaker. At 17, she's made her own movies. She's engaged. We've spoken to her intelligence as there are multiple forms of intelligence. I see Amani Watson, a rising senior at the University of Chicago. She's a journalist. She writes. She just came back from Princeton. These are the types of educational experiences that school should be, not summer school experiences, school.
So, which transitions me to you, though, because I want to talk to you about the success. We actually had Tim on MSNBC, like everyone else, because you made national news. And I think you, because you are amazing, but I also think you made national news because people are stunned when they hear that a whole school of black boys could be on their way. It was like a unicorn, like some animal that had never been seen before. But that's why it was on, you were on our competitors, I'm with us. What did you do, to Shane's point, to really, first of all, why are charter schools appealing? Let me start with that, and then you tell me why you made yours special.
Sure. So I will answer that question. Before I answer that question, I just want to add that one of the problems I think that exists, you asked the question, why is it there's no solution? We know this problem is there. And I think one of the reasons is because there's no sense of urgency. That's right. Ebony has done a fantastic job putting this event together. This is a packed house. There should be as many people in here and outside as were at the Lady Gaga concert a couple weeks ago. It should be a huge, huge sense of urgency around solving and addressing this issue, and that doesn't exist. You've got like-minded people who want to see some change, but you don't have enough people recognizing that this is a real problem that we've got to figure out how to fix. So, you know, kind of why haven't we come up with a solution? I think that's there. In terms of what we've done at Urban Prep.
Because I think there's also a sense of helplessness as well. People feel like, what can I do? And that's why when the charter idea popped up, you've got families willing to go to a lottery to get their kids in this school because it gave them something to act on.
That's true.
That was real and tangible.
But the other piece of that is with charter schools, you've got people who say there's a problem with the system and I want to be part of the solution, and so I'm going to go and try to fix it. So I think you've got
no magic dust that is associated with charter schools.
Without a doubt.
Let's not do this charter school thing, because those schools, some of them are great and some of them are awful. And charter schools, if you put them up against other schools, they don't look any better than regular schools. It's a myth.
So let's talk about
I think it's important to point out that that charter schools are public schools.
Right.
And charter schools have successes and charter schools have failure. So I'm not suggesting that all schools should be charter schools. All I was suggesting was that they provide or can provide a solution to the big problem that we're facing
So let's
here
start off with
in education.
why are charters appealing, and then we'll talk with the reality of the problem. You got me heated there. I saw you lean up. I'm like, security, let's get this under control.
All your old friends.
I'm like, listen, Tim is weak. He can't handle you, okay? But let's talk.
Don't let these good looks fool you.
One good look. I told you it was going to be emotional. So Tim, let's talk about why the idea of a charter school appealed to so many parents.
Well, so at Urban Prep, certainly, what was appealing to our parents, I don't think was the fact that we are a charter school. It was the fact that we were going to be focused on the academic needs and the achievement of a particular population, in our case, young black boys. And so that was something that was very appealing to our parents, which is why we have a wait list of so many and why we were able to open additional schools. But many parents choose charter schools for the same reasons they might choose a magnet school, or why they might choose an art school, or they might choose some other type of school in their community or in their city. It's simply because what they want to do is have choice. They want to be able to find high quality options, and they want to be able to connect with their school in a way that's meaningful, more than just, oh, just go to the neighborhood school that's down the street.
Oh, just go to the neighborhood school that's down the street. The fact is that 90% of white kids and 95% of black kids are going to go to the neighborhood school that's down the street. The fact is that while I don't have a problem with charter schools per se, I have a problem with this magic dust nonsense that these charter schools are something special. Here's what the fact is, that we have to make urban public schools work, because that's where most of our young people are going to be going. We have to make sure that they have the resources, that these places do. You talk about factories, you go to some of these schools, they look awful. You know, we wouldn't work there. You know, the windows are broken, the toilets are broken. Why would anybody want to go to places like that? We need to put those resources. If the Obama administration were to do anything for me, it would be that every city with these 2,000 dropout in every city, let's have a model school. In Chicago, in New York, in Greensboro, in Washington, a model school that has the best of everything. But the fact is that, we play all these games with education. We wouldn't play games with anything else. Imagine that CEO said, okay, I'm gonna have a charter, I think I have a charter balance sheet. And we're gonna deal with a balance sheet. Linda, could you do that? A charter balance sheet, for Ebony Magazine? I don't think it would turn out right. So let's be clear. What we need to do is make sure that every young person in charter schools discriminate towards the children who have activist parents. Most of our young people do not have activist parents. You got a 16-year-old who's had a child, that young lady is not going to stand in line all this time to make sure her young person gets into the charter school. I want to make sure that every child has an opportunity.
If I could, the one thing I would say is that first and foremost, I think everybody here wants to see this at scale. I'm a Whitney Young graduate. I'm a public school graduate, but there's 120 high schools, and we need 120 Whitney Youngs. And I think what happens is that so often when we have these conversations, we talk about charter versus public, charter public versus traditional public, versus private, versus this and that, when we're missing the larger piece. Some of this is funding, right? If we were funding the state of Illinois, all of our schools, the way that the suburban schools are funded, the way that certain schools are funded in certain districts, we would have more access to resources. The second piece is that as we're divided, we're not talking. We're not discussing best strategies across private, charter, public. We have to talk more and suggest what kind of strategies work across the board. Because once you start pitting factions of teachers and factions of parents and factions of students against each other, this is what has always happened to people of color. We've always been pitted against each other. And next thing you know, we've been divided and conquered. So I think it's very important when we talk about education, we have to get everyone at the table, sort of like tonight, and then start talking about the fact of what works at Chicago High School for the Agricultural Sciences, a public high school on the Chicago Southwest side.
Yeah, I think something that we don't want to lose sight of is school reform is actually hard work. It's not just a matter of people not having the desire to make it work. It's hard. There is no magic bullet. Like you said, I've been to the dropout factory schools, and yeah, there are teachers there who have given up, but there are a lot of teachers, there are a lot of administrators who are working hard because they recognize how important this problem is to solve. The problem is, because they're so desperate to solve the problem, they want to find that magic bullet. right? And so they'll look for the latest curriculum, the latest program, whatever it is, and they'll reach out for everything. But that's not actually how you solve the problem.
But can you blame a parent who is looking at their child who's in the 5th grade and there's this option that's a charter? Yes, it is not the magic bullet, but selfishly, I don't care about everyone else's kid. I care about this one in my home that I want to be the first to go to college in my family, and gravitate to the charter because you hear that there's accountability, that if this charter doesn't work in 3 to 5 years, it's gone. And then you hear the news debate that teachers who are tenured can't lose their jobs, even when everybody in the room knows not all of the teachers should be there.
You may not care about everybody
No,
else's
I'm saying
kids, but
hypothetically.
here's
I don't have a kid, so I care about them all.
No, but here's what I'm
Just
saying.
don't want to keep them.
We all had better care about everybody's kid,
Right.
because the fact is that the economic engine that we're dealing with is an engine that's broken because everybody's kid does not have the opportunity. Ireland has a greater percentage of people Ireland. I'm not picking on Ireland. I mean, I'm not xenophobic at all, but Ireland, come on, y'all. South Korea has a greater percentage of college graduates than the United States because somebody's not caring about everybody's kids. The way that we're going to make sure that we remain an industrial power and leader is that we do what we've always done best, which is educate. As soon as the demographics started shifting, we started caring less.
But that's the difference in thinking as a leader as you are. And I think, again, seeing some of the parents who are just working their butts off to try to get their kid. I went to a magnet school, and had I not gone to a magnet school, I probably wouldn't have ended up at Temple University. I don't know, but it changed my life. I had an incredible English teacher, AP teacher, who introduced me to things far greater than I ever imagined, and that was a life-changing moment. I know that we should think about everyone. I'm not saying that we should not, but I'm being real, that I know that there are parents, at that moment, they're thinking about that child. And if there's a school, it may be controversial, but if it's having excellent results, they're standing in the line to get in.
Because what schools like Urban Prep offer is hope. And what so many in those schools that you've described, those dropout factories, other places that we're seeing, there's hope, there's a feeling of hopelessness. What this administration is doing, more than in the last generation, we are ensuring funding equity. Our proposals will make sure that poor schools and schools of color finally get their fair share of resources. Our proposals will make sure that the best practices that we can glean from the urban preps of the world are spread to traditional public schools. Our proposals will make sure that we put an end to tracking in this country. For far too long, we never gave students of color access to the skills and courses that they'll need to succeed in this new global economy. Now 31 states, over 30 states, have decided they're going to change that. And the value of a high school diploma is no longer going to be based on one's zip code. We do know what to do in this administration's proposals with the civic will that needs to happen in order to see that they get implemented properly and passed into law will change the playing field for once and for all. As we've talked about, the sense of urgency needs to be much greater across the country. It certainly exists within this administration. As the President and the Secretary have often said, transforming the way our schools work is the most important civil rights issue of our time. It doesn't look like one. It doesn't look like the movements of the past. Unless it seeps in, this crisis seeps into America's consciousness, federal government can't do it alone. Quite frankly, schools can't do it alone. It will take a community effort, one that brings all of the municipal resources to bear. But we need the sense that, once again, this is the most important civil rights issue of our time, and we need a movement in this country to see that it gets done.
And we have, as you see, Mary Lowry from the Chicago Public School Board with us. Thank you so much, Mary, for joining us. Let me ask you, we'll bring you right into the fire. You're going to get baptized by fire here. As long as schools are funded with property taxes, it seems to many that there will always be a great divide, that it is, as so many, and Rosalind just said, the civil rights issue of our time, but there's always, if it's funded through property taxes, you're going to have someone at the bottom, someone at the top, because I wish we could all be rich, but we're not.
I agree. That is an issue, but I want to circle back and touch on a few things, and I apologize for being a little late. Frankly, I didn't know that this panel was happening. The CEO for the schools was scheduled to be here. He became sick, and I'm here. And,
and we're happy you're here.
Thank you. And I have just been in this role for a matter of months, but I come from an educator. My mother was a teacher for 41 years. She retired, she went back to school, and she taught for another 5 years until she became sick and passed away. The reason why she went back to school and decided to teach even after in her later years is she said to me, and I rebuffed at the concept of her going back, she said that children are in need. And today, this conversation is about the children being in need. The disparity on the property tax, with respect to property taxes, that's real. That there are some things that are advantage on the charter side of the equation, that's real. But that's part of the, charters are part of the solution. Contract schools are part of the solution. It does not mean, however, that we don't have an obligation to lift the neighborhood schools, because it can't be an us against them. And the way the CPS system is structured, the charter schools are actually in part of our fabric. The contract schools are part of our fabric. The neighborhood schools, the magnet schools, the select schools are part of our fabric. I am a product of a public school. I am a partner at one of the largest firms in the world. If I can do it, so can that child, and that child, and that child. So I don't have the luxury of saying us against them. My objective, my job indeed, is to lift all. I have to use technology. I was in back and I heard you reference technology. We were having breakfast the other day and talking about things that we can do collaboratively. I don't have the luxury of not reaching out to the charter community, not talking to the contract community, not being in neighborhood schools. I was at Robeson High School today, and we introduced iLearning there, and this had never been done for the summertime, but it was born of my personal experience. And when I was growing up, I liked summer school. I liked school. I was an anomaly. I was a little bit of a nerd, but I was a cool nerd. And I asked the question, what are we doing for that kid? And I found out that in the entirety of District 299, the third largest in the country, if you were a kid that was like me, that wanted to go to summer school, if you didn't fall in one of the three buckets, it was not an option to you because people were trying to deal with the funding issues, et cetera. And I understood that concept at the time, but today I can use technology to bridge the gap. So if I was a kid, if there was a kid who simply wanted to take additional courses, there was no option unless somebody was going to pay for it, and the likelihood that would happen in the CPS system was diminished because we have a higher 80 percentile of people in Title I category. If there was a kid that did not have credit recovery, did not have an absentee problem, did not fail a test, if they didn't fall in one of those three buckets, there was no summer school option unless someone was paying for it. So you could imagine for the entirety of 299, this district, the third largest in the country, I had a situation where those children were at a disadvantage. With a single pen stroke, I altered that so that iLearning bridged that gap for the summer, and then we can build on that for the winter, for the spring, et cetera, and expand opportunities. So I'm open to all opportunities to expand learning, but I recognize it's an issue. Within the public school system, we are replete with them. I've come across people who have the best interests of children in mind, and I've come across people who clearly are misguided. But my charge is to deal with all of that, and that's okay. That's okay. We'll get there.
Well, you have us now intrigued. How are they misguided?
Well,
name.
Well, that's not. The lawyer in me won't allow me to do that. Okay. I won't name names. But in part, it is channeling efforts. The efforts that Tim King has put forth have been extraordinary. But the idea that we would begin a conversation with the us against them with respect to charters is a losing proposition for the children. Right. And so we can't do that. We need to call upon the best practices. I didn't start off just going to only select schools or magnet schools. I went in, as I said today, in Robeson High School, and if anybody knows that, that's in the hood. That's a neighborhood school. To talk about what they're doing, and more importantly, to talk about what I can do in my new role to help them to bridge the gap. When I went to Simeon, they have a 30% homeless rate. That's an extraordinary number. Now, homeless by definition is defined as grandparents, aunts, uncles, etc. those children are also having to go to work to support themselves. They're dropping out at a higher rate, and they're dropping out later in life, so they could be 15 credits or whatever, 5 credits away from graduation, and they're dropping out because they have to support themselves. I can bridge that with technology.
Right.
So but Ida wouldn't know that but for getting out and hearing these stories and gaining a greater understanding of what's happening in the neighborhood. So when I had breakfast with Tim the other day, we talked about opportunities for collaboration. When I met with the principals of Julian and Phillips and Robeson and Simeon, we talked about opportunities for collaboration. When I was at Chicago Ag, we talked about opportunities for collaboration.
You're looking at taking the things that work and using it as a model. But let's talk, I want to do a couple of quick fires because I don't know how much time we have, but I want to first talk about the quality of the instructors. Teachers in other nations come from the top 10% of graduating classes. Teachers in the United States, according to the research, tend to come from the bottom half of graduating classes. What is the solution? Is it about money? And what do we do with our teachers now who are not the best and the brightest?
Well,
I'll start off with you because I know I was already warned. I got my gloves on. I'm just asking the question.
What were you warned about? Anyway, first of all, I think that we've got to put more money into education. We don't pay teachers enough. And you know, when you look at their salaries and you compare them to other salaries, why would somebody really want to go into education unless they have a passion for it? That's number one. Number two, when we talk about inefficient instructors, we also have to talk about the entirety of what they deal with. I mean, there are those who would say, well, if the students can't pass the test, well, wait a minute, let's talk about the test. If the students can't pass the test, then fire the instructors. I think that's wrong. I think when you look at some of the young people who come to us, you talk about 30% homelessness. The school cannot be the nutritionist, the psychologist, all these things that are not happening at home with our fosters and everything else. And so while I think we have to go for excellence in the classroom, I think we also have to cut teachers a break. There is an anti-teacher movement that is appalling. That is absolutely appalling. And when you see some of what happens with some of our young people and their parents who come to schools, ready to get it on. And you know, teachers, I don't know how some people do it. One of the things I think we have to do with K through 12 is just like we do in colleges. Give folks a sabbatical. Go back and continue education, get an opportunity to do some more stuff. But the bottom line is, yes, we want excellent instructors. We're going to have to pay for it. We're going to have to pay for it. And this whole Teach for America.
But if you pay more, then can you demand more?
Absolutely. If you pay more, you can demand, and you'll get more.
Because in everything, there are good journalists, there are bad journalists, there are good doctors, there are bad doctors. And no one wants to go to the bad doctor. And no kid wants to be with the bad teacher. No parent wants that. So what do you do now that you have a system where teachers are tenured? And yes, there are challenges, but we know there are some teachers that are sleeping in classes, they've been caught on tape, that are not engaged, that maybe they loved it way, way, way long time ago, but they don't love it now. What do you do?
Well, in my instance, again, having grown up with a teacher and having been around teachers, I'm the only lawyer within the family, and most of the people within my family structure in terms of females are teachers, principals, administrators, etc. That truth around the kitchen table was there are people who are not performing on the teacher side. So frankly, what I did was something that has never been done in the history of the district, and that is we began the process of terminating those who are ranked in the unsatisfactory category. This was not, just so we're clear, this was not a referendum on teachers. That is my lifeblood. So I'm not going to judge them, all teachers, that way. But we have to, just as lawyers, doctors, candlestick makers, there are some who fall at the bottom of the spectrum. And we have to be willing to have a conversation around that. And in my capacity, I have to be willing to act on that. So that was the first step forward. But what I've also begun is to have a dialogue with the leadership of those groups to talk about best practices, to talk about how I can do a better job through the district of shoring up the teacher in the classroom that's confronted with all these issues. And yes, it is unfortunate that some teachers have to be all these things, but the reality is in certain districts, You have to be. So how do I help them rise under those circumstances? And we have to think through that. We certainly want a scenario where there's an opportunity to incentivize teachers, more people who are in varying professions getting into the teaching area, giving them merit-based pay. That's part of the discussion. This is a long discussion. Yeah. It doesn't have a quick solution.
Right. And we're just talking about it now, but Elaine, you have some input.
Yeah, I do. Certainly we want the best and the brightest in the classroom, and certainly we do not want teachers who are ineffective in the classroom. But what we've seen through years of research is what's more important than the individual qualities that teachers bring is how teachers work together in the school. It's vastly more important. Think about this. Let's say you get rid of all of your ineffective teachers in the school. That would probably be about 5% of the teachers in your school. You have 95% of your teachers still there. Then what are you going to do? Unless you have a plan for professional development, for collective work around improving the school, you're not going to go anywhere. And when your most effective teachers leave, where are you if you don't have that plan? We need to focus on getting teachers working together and building them while they're in the school, not just getting the right people in the school.
Which brings me to curriculum. Do we need to address the fact that maybe what worked 30, 40 years ago, maybe even 20, is not, to your point about technology, what's working today, and hammer that in to the top of the food chain as well as parents at home and understand the game has changed. We've got to do something different.
Absolutely, Tamron. I don't know any business, any enterprise that would be working with a business model from 30 years ago, from 40 years ago. I'd like to see that business that's doing quite well today using 1968 technologies. Yet, when we're working with our young people, we're using 1908 technologies. And so we definitely have to start doing something different.
Who's in charge of transitioning this education system to a modern time?
I think teachers should be, first and foremost, because I think teachers do get a really bad reputation. Yes. At the University of Chicago Charter Schools and at Chicago Public Schools, we have good teachers. They need support the same way our young people need support, the same way our administrators need support. I'm not as good of an administrator now as I will be 2 years from now. Right. So we have to think differently about supporting teachers, giving them control over curriculum, and giving them control over
I'm going to let
Ruslan
follow up, and then we're going to transition to what parents need to do. And we're going to also talk about the environment. We talked a little bit about homelessness with children and the stats for violence in schools, kids having to walk through gangs to get to the school. How can I focus on my test? But go ahead and respond to this.
I think we're hearing it, that teachers need a kind of supports to change the curriculum, to engage students. Students don't drop out because they're too challenged, they drop out because they're bored. Teachers need supports to get better. One of the things that Race to the Top has done, I know Ebony interviewed the president for the September edition where he talks about this. One of the things that Race to the Top has done is enabled us to know who's a great teacher in what classroom. There were states that had laws that have now been changed as a result of the Race to the Top competition. There were states that had laws where you couldn't evaluate a teacher based on how well he or she is teaching. No one would suggest that you only evaluate teachers based on test scores or their performance in student learning over time. But the fact that in this country we prohibited that kind of understanding of teacher quality doesn't bode well for children. What we're seeing now is conversations across the country taking place about what it takes to be a strong teacher and how to get better. What we're also seeing now is finally the biggest opportunity gap changing. What gives rise to the achievement gap is that in almost without fail, poor kids and kids of color have the least effective teachers in their classroom. And the research is quite clear that the biggest difference we could make in changing the way public schools work and improving student learning is to ensure we have a strong teacher in the classroom. One of the ways we can do that, Dr. Malveaux, black teachers. Black male teachers in this country hover at about 2% of all teachers are black male, just 2%. Just about 8% are black teachers overall. We've committed over $1 billion to HBCUs, in part to help ensure that these longstanding, what should be flagship institutions in our country can produce a new kind of teacher force to meet the new kind of student need.
And I want to transition to the environment here because we have to talk about that. We saw a stat in our research. 2007, students 12 to 18 were victims of 1.5 million non-fatal crimes while they were at school. 1.1 million away. They were in more danger at some schools.
How do you deal with that, especially with young black boys and the realities of what they face?
Well, it's a great transition from the last conversation or last question to this one, because something that I wanted to point out was, in addition to paying the right amount of money for teachers, in addition to providing the right professional development for teachers and the right supports for teachers, you've also got to create an environment in which the teachers want to be there and the teachers want to teach and can teach. And you can't do that if you don't have the right kind of culture within your school. At Urban Prep, for example, we have really committed and passionate teachers. We've got a group of folks in this room right now who are volunteer teachers who from all over the country who came to work at Urban Prep because they wanted to be a part of that culture. So creating that positive school culture is key, not just for the students, but also for the teachers. And the way you do that really is by setting the expectation. This is what we're going to be about. For us, this is the Urban Prep way. And once you set that expectation and give children the opportunity and the tools to meet those expectations, you'll be surprised at how well they will meet them.
What about the parents? We have to talk about the parents here, and I'll tell this quick little story. My mom, like yours, educator, and once I came home with a B that I tried to change to an A. I have never told this story. No, I was in the back erasing. I've never told this in public. I give the report card. My mother said, "Are you crazy?" and marched me back to the school, and my principal was the only person there. I won't tell you the rest because it probably would have gotten my mother arrested. But
it got you right.
It got me right and straight, and I never did. I could be Mother Teresa. I was so straight after that.
Right.
But what about the parents? What do you need, or what do we need to see from them?
Well, we need activist parents, but we also need to understand that when students don't have activist parents, that's when the community has to step in. We need parents to, I have a similar story of, I went home without homework because the Catholic teacher said you had to write about the country in Europe you were from. And so I said, I'm not from any European country. So my mother said, where's your homework? And I said, I don't have any, not from Europe. She said, oh, France. I mean, all kind of white folks up in me. And so I ended up having to write about all of Europe. Because she went back to the school and said, this child came home without homework. And the teacher said, well, she said she wasn't from Europe. And they said, okay, you know, all these countries, you know, Malvo, obviously France was up in there. So, you know, awful kind of thing. But those of us who have educators in our background know what activist parents are like. You couldn't get away with anything. You had homework, you had reading, you had stuff. Some of our young people don't have parents who are equipped to do that. That's where our sororities and fraternities, our NAACPs, our urban leagues, our organizations come in. We have got to decide that every child will have some activist who's going to make sure that something happens to them. You talked earlier about reading in the womb, but there's some folks who can't read. And they've got something in the womb. And so somebody's got to sit with them and say, let's read to you. So we want activist parents, but we want also to really talk about this village thing. People say it takes a village. It really is going to take a community for us to close these gaps. And Russell, you talked about it earlier when you talked about the gaps that needed to be closed. We have all got to decide the urgency is not about your kid or this parent. It's really about how this country can sustain its economic success. Not too successful now, but it's economic success while writing off a huge portion of the population, and we can't do it. So when you see a kid, someone's got to pick up the slack for that kid.
What do you think we need to see from parents?
So I think when this conversation, we're talking about schools, and notice we've talked about schools, but we keep talking about components of schools as if they are the problem. We have to fix the components. We have to fix the young people. We have to fix the teachers. Now we're saying that we have to fix the parents. And there should be something that we see a trend here. We actually have to fix schools. What are schools doing wrong to not invite parents in? What are schools doing wrong to not engage parents? We have good parents. So we have to tell the counter narrative. When we do open houses, when we do report card pickup at the University of Chicago Charter School Woodlawn campus, 80% of our parents are here. A parent brought Ms. Watson here today. I spoke to Ms. Watson. We have another parent, Ms. Foreman, who's in this office right now.
What have you found that works?
So what works is engaging parents, asking them to be a part of designing the school, inviting them in, having parent nights. If we have parents that don't have strong reading skills, at Donahue campus, we have reading classes for parents. We have a computer technology class for parents. We have a salsa class for parents at Donahue. NKO Charter School, we have a parent room. University of Chicago Charter School Woodlawn campus, we're trying to do the same thing. Carter G. Woodson, our middle school, had a real men cookout one day for their father. So we have to bring our parents in, engage them, and give them power, because too often schools are only contacting parents when we need something. When we're calling to complain, when we're calling to report, when we should be calling to celebrate and asking them to be a part of changing this village, if it's a village. It can't be a village with just the teachers of the village. It has to be the village with all components of it. Otherwise, it's like just part of the village.
Well, we have about 5 minutes left. This went far faster than I ever wanted to, and I wish we could stay, especially just to hear your antics. But Dr. Malvo, my new best friend. But
throw that in there, right?
look at, she's so fun. Imagine her after like midnight. It's a party. Okay, but we always think, and we talk with the team with Ebony, we wanted to end on a positive note. We wanted to end on making you feel empowered. And in the magazine, which mine is over there, so it's way over, President Obama was asked to provide 5 takeaways to parents. And I thought that that was amazing. We like lists. You know, you like the top 5 lipsticks or the top 5 places to get a burger. We love that. So I'm putting you on the spot to come up with, it can be 2, it can be 3, things that the parents here and those of us who aren't parents who just love the kids in our lives, that we can take away. School has already started for some kids, but it's about to start for most. What are a couple of takeaway things this year, right now, they can do? Mary?
Sure. Schools have started in the Chicago area. Many of you know that 100,000 students started on Monday. The balance of over 300,000 students will start school on September 7th. One of the quick things that parents can do is, for schools, students in the district, provide current information. You'd be shocked at how many parents, we don't have current phone numbers, current contact information. There's a thing called Parent Portal now, so that if your kid is missing in school or has gotten an F or other kinds of information, they can email you, send a text, and let you know about where your child is, your ground child is, your niece or nephew, presuming they stay with you, in the process. That's one thing that is a business imperative. I like what the brother said in terms of making sure that the parents get in the school. That's missing in a lot of our neighborhood schools, and we're having lots of discussion around how to do that. But it's a business imperative for the parent, because frankly, no one's going to be a better advocate than you. And certainly the other thing that parents can do is continue to have a dialogue with the teachers, with the principals, so that we have better educational outcomes for our children.
I agree with those things. Also, demand change. Don't accept the status quo. Hold your leaders to account. Everybody, when they're running for office, is an education congressman, an education city councilman. Hold them to account for the change that they promise during elections. Ensure that that schools are open to you. Parents are the stakeholders, the truest stakeholders besides young people in our schools. Schools have a responsibility for them. This administration's proposals double parental engagement dollars, seize upon them, and demand change.
I would also use the word demand. I'd say demand excellence. Go into the schools when you realize that your child is not being challenged, is not being given opportunities to succeed. I would be thrilled if I had parents calling and complaining about things like, my son's not getting enough homework, as opposed to a complaint like, why does my baby have to have homework over the weekend? So demand excellence, and I think you're going to end up seeing some more positive outcomes for your children.
Elaine.
Yeah, I think we need to recognize that the best schools, no matter where they're located, the schools that work the best are those where parents and teachers are partners in children's education. Those are the schools where teachers like to work, the schools where they stay. Those are the schools where teachers and students feel the safest. But that means parents working with teachers. It means the school reaching out to parents, and building that community of trust.
I like the word demand. I think it's an important word. I think that parents should demand excellence, demand the best. Parents also need to listen to their young people. I think it's really important for parents to have conversations with their young people at the end of the day, the end of the week. What did you learn in school today? What did you do in school today? Your mom knew about that B. My mom knew about that homework. It's because there's a conversation going on. All too often we have so many parents who are working 2 and 3 jobs, who are doing so much that they don't hear their young people, and they've got to take the time to hear them. And for those folks in this audience who are not parents, take somebody else's child under your wing. Take the moment to find some child in your neighborhood who you see. I mean, there was once upon a time these extended families where, you know, you didn't have any books, someone gave you books, you didn't have this, someone gave it to you. So all of us, if we believe that education is a civil rights issue of the current time, then we all have to be as passionate about it as we are about anything else. I mean, some folks are going to go marching on August 28th, Glenn Beck one side, Al Sharpton on the other side. Who's going to march for our kids? Who's going to march to make sure that our young people do the same fervor that got 250,000 people to the monument in 1968? Who's going to do that in 2010?
Shane?
I think one of the things that I would say for parents is tell your young people that they are fantastic. Remind them of their brilliance. Encourage them to recognize their intelligence, because that's what my mother did for me. And she's sitting in this audience, and she told me how brilliant I was. And I would like to think that I was, but I think that's something that is just remiss. Parents need to support, recognize, and celebrate their young people, because they are fantastic.
Well, we greatly appreciate our panel. We know that the dropout rate in the African American community is 40%. I believe one child drops out every 26 minutes, and we've been here a couple of hours, so we've lost a few. But with the knowledge that we've acquired today, the great conversation, we can save many more, whether you're a parent, an aunt, mentor, whatever. And we greatly appreciate you all participating. And how I know you care about this issue and that you love children and you want to demand and you will demand change is that you sat in this hot as fish grease room and listened to everything that was said. I saw so many heads nodding while fanning, but none of those chairs are empty. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you, Ebony. Thank you to our amazing panel. And again, I use the word amazing a lot. It's just my favorite word, but it is so true when it comes to the 6 of you here. Thank you very much. Amy?
Okay, it is hot, though.
It's like a M&M melting.
I
mean, Shane.
But when I was talking to Shane earlier,
I'm sorry, Shane.
Shane was talking about the heat, and I was like, but Shane, you're not sweating your hair out, though.
No, Shane is
last time I checked, your hair was not getting sweat out.
He's dying. I apologize.
Anyway, I just want to say that this issue hits home for me. It really hits home for me. Like Dr. Malveaux, I was very fortunate to have activist parents, both of whom were educators. As a matter of fact, they both got their respective PhDs from the University of Chicago, and I was born on this campus, so I kind of feel like I'm home. And I just moved back to Chicago. I've only been here for about a week, and I'm the mother of a 4-year-old son. So I now have to consider how to educate him and what to do, whether it's a public school system, a private school. I really don't know. I honestly don't know. And I feel very strongly about this issue, and I feel strongly that not only will I, along with all of you, have to figure out how I'm going to engage my child, but we all have to stay engaged in this issue and care about and remain passionate about all of our children. On behalf of the Johnson Publishing Company and Ebony, I would like to first thank Tamron Hall for doing such an excellent job as moderator and for being so passionate about this issue. Thank you, Tamron. Thank you. Can we also please have some additional applause for each of our panelists as a thank you for their contributions. I'd like to name them all and give you their specific titles. Shane Evans, Director of the University of Chicago Charter School Woodlawn Secondary Campus. Dr. Julianne Malveaux, President of Bennett College. Elaine M. Allensworth, Director of Research at the Consortium on Chicago School Research at the University of Chicago Urban Education Institute. Tim King, Founder and President of the Urban Prep Charter Academy. Ruslan Ali, Assistant Secretary for the Office of Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education. And we are very grateful for your presence. Thank you so much for filling in. Mary Richardson, Chair of the Chicago Board of Education. We would like to especially thank the University of Chicago and MSNBC for partnering with us on this very important issue and for helping Ebony to bring such a critical discussion to the American people. Please make sure that you tune into the special Making the Grade that will be broadcast on MSNBC this Sunday, August 15th, from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. We would also like to thank each of you for joining us in this inaugural Ebony Roundtable event. You can look forward to more community roundtables across the nation in the future. On August 17th, please pick up your September issue of Ebony Magazine on newsstands everywhere. And join us as we continue this conversation on ebony.com, on Facebook, on Twitter, in your communities. Email me, hit me up on Twitter. I want to hear about your opinions on what happened today, and I want to get feedback. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you all.
Thank you for joining us for the Ebony Education Roundtable discussion. The discussion will continue on Facebook and Twitter and will be broadcast on MSNBC on August 15th at 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.